with you today to talk about this study. And just to give you a little background on it, we, from Chart's point of view, started working on this. Probably about 3 or 4, actually almost 5 years ago, where we wanted to make sure we gave the best possible information to our members, and because we all believe knowledge is power. And so we did a survey. We found out where we were within the state of our industry, in the hospitality industry, to get that information. We were lucky enough last year to partner with TDN2K, and they're back again this year to give us some updates on our progress. And so that's what we're going to do today. We're going to give you just a real brief overview of our results. We're going to give you some insights from a conference that we just had, from the Chart conference, and then we'll sort of tie it all together at the end. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Melissa, and she's going to start running us through some of the results.
Thanks, John, and we're so excited about partnering with Chart and doing this, and we've been long-time supporters, so it's been fantastic being able to work with you all on this. Before we start and get into the actual survey results, what I wanted to start off with was a really brief state of the restaurant industry, and I know Calvin's going to be really instrumental in giving us some insights onto the hotel side, but before we start, I think it's really important for us to look at what's happening when it comes to our industries that we operate in. So the first slide I'm going to show you is our restaurant sales and traffic, and you can see here is that restaurant sales are increasing. We're seeing a high increase. Great news for us in the restaurant industry, and it continues to rise. So Q1 of this year was the best quarter we've seen since pre-recession, which is great news for us. Traffic still continues to be a struggle for us. And we see that traffic, the aggregate effect of traffic, is that we've lost 11% of traffic since 2008, which will continue to be a struggle and something we need to really pay attention to. When we look at the numbers, we see that the restaurant industry is growing, and growing a lot, at a 3.5% rate since January of 2014. When you look at the average annual growth in all U.S. jobs since January 2014, we see it's 2%. So not only are we adding more restaurants, I believe in 2014 we added 1,900 restaurants. We have to staff all of those and train all of those people. And we're also seeing job growth throughout, not only in our industries, in the hotel and restaurant industry, but in all industries. When we look at the effects of that has on our industries, we start to see turnover creeping up, and I'm sure a lot of you are feeling this right now. As unemployment goes down, turnover goes up. When we asked our member companies what are their 3 most important HR initiatives for 2015, you can imagine that turnover in 2015 was at the top, with 58% of companies saying that that is really important to them in reducing turnover. And it's all segments that are feeling this right now. When we look at who we're hiring and also what age we're training, I think it's important to look at this in the aspects of who are we training, who's on our 4 walls, and we're seeing that median age of hourly hires decreasing. So we're getting a younger workforce. And compared to other industries, that we are a very young workforce, and across the board, from quick service to fast casual, casual dining, and upscale, we have very young employees in our hourly workforce. That also attributes a little bit to one of the most alarming effects, is that when we look at 2014 and we look at terminations overall, 75% of hourly and manager terminations in 2014 were voluntary. So they decided to walk out on their own. It wasn't us telling them it's time to leave. They were making their own decisions. This is really, really high, and compared to what we were tracking pre-recession, and a little alarming when we start to look at the numbers and the impact it can make on our businesses. We saw that 27% of restaurant hourly employee terminations occurred with just within the first 3 months of their employment, and 66% of all terminations were people that were employed in less than a year within your organization. So this makes us think: are we hiring the right people? Are we sourcing the right people? And are we really keeping them within our four walls? Is that training really coming into effect? And I think we have some of those insights that we're going to be sharing here shortly. We asked about turnover and the effects that it has on business performance. You saw that first slide. I saw that sales were increasing, but traffic continues to really be a struggle for us. We looked at companies that have, on average, lower turnover than their competitors, and we saw that their traffic was up 0.8%. You compare that to the companies that had turnover that were higher than their competitors, and they were in the negative of 1.4%. This is a 2.2% difference in traffic, and when we're really in a business right now where we're just begging for those traffic numbers, this is really a big impact on our industry. So the first part of this is I really would love, Calvin and John, for you guys to give me a little bit of your insights. I know you were at the conference and you got to talk to a lot of people when they saw this presentation at the conference. What was everyone's feedback? And then too, Calvin, can you kind of give us your insights on, is this also what's happening in the hotels? So Calvin, why don't you answer that first?
Yeah, so I will start off and just talk a little bit about the revenue, or what we look at from a hotel standpoint is ADR, which is average daily rate. That's kind of the key metric from a revenue standpoint for a hotel. And working with American Hotel and Lodgings Association as well as Smith Travel, we've seen an increase in the ADR, and we're also seeing an increase in foot traffic as well. So we are moving up. When it comes to the turnover numbers, it is similar. And one thing that I learned at the conference from the groups and how we ran this presentation is, one of the aha moments was you asked the question of whether or not we are hiring the right people. Is that the reason why turnover is going up, is because maybe we're not? And one thing that was thrown out to the group was it isn't as much as we're not hiring the right individuals, as much as it is the individuals that we are hiring are looking to move faster. So we may hire an individual that is fresh out of college, or someone that could be a high potential for our hotel or for our restaurant, and those individuals want to see growth quicker than they are seeing, and when they're not seeing them in the amount of time or in the time span that they want to see them in, based upon looking at unemployment, they have choices. They have an opportunity to go somewhere else. If they're good enough, they can go somewhere else and maybe see that growth that they're looking at. So that was definitely one thing that I took away, and just kind of my views when it comes to the hotel side. John, what do you got from the restaurant side?
Yeah, I think what you just talked about there was really important, because you have to look at our average age, which was a slide she showed earlier, and clearly we skew very heavy on the millennial side. And as you know, if you've studied anything about the generations, millennial side, those people are looking to move up faster. That's one of the things that drives them, is promotion and movement. And so in many cases, a lot of that voluntary turnover is because they can go get a position. There's openings now. People are hiring. Their younger people are just wanting to continue to move and continue to grow. And so if you're not providing the opportunity for growth, opportunity for stretch assignments, opportunity for some personal growth, then they're going to go to some place that's looking for that. So that was a big aha moment for us as well at the conference. Just a quick reminder, everybody, if you have questions, we obviously can't hear you because audio is turned off, but you can ask questions over on the right-hand side or on your screen. You'll see a little box there where you can type in a question that goes directly to the panelists. And at one point, when we have a place in the section to answer it, we'll answer that question for you. And so, Melissa, I'm going to go ahead and turn it back over to you.
Yeah, we actually just got a question. Is that the question is, are we blaming the turnover on the individual just wanting to move up or out, or are we thinking there is a lack and gap in the training? And I just want to take a stab at this and just give a little bit of insight from what we know to be true, is that we see a big gap in age, and we're seeing that gap continue to get bigger between hourly and management. So I think that can be a part of the answer, is that people do want to move up, but are they seeing people like them in management, or are they saying, you know, I have to be in my late 30s or early 40s to really become a manager, so that's not a good career choice for me. I need to move on. So I think there's a little bit of insight in that, is that are we providing enough opportunities within our own organizations to feel like there's continuous movement? John Cullen, do you want to try to answer that?
I would like to just, if it's okay, John, let me just take a quick stab at it. And you know, I sit here at the Broadmoor, where the average full-time hourly employee has been here for 5.5 years. The average manager has been here for 11.4 years, which from an industry standpoint is pretty crazy. It's pretty awesome. So when you talk about growth and development, there isn't a lot of vertical growth at the Broadmoor, because people have been here for 25 and 30 years, and some of them have been in their positions for that long. So from a training standpoint, and you mentioned this, Melissa, you have to give people the opportunity to grow horizontally. We have been blessed over the past, I'd say 3 years of, you know, opening new businesses, and, you know, maybe we can't put someone into a general manager role in the new business, but we absolutely can take a server and, you know, train them to be a certified trainer, and then send them to the new business to do training. So growth happens horizontally. It may not happen vertically over a period of time. So that's one thing that we definitely need to look at.
Great.
Quickly, I think you're right. I think it is development opportunities, but it is also training. And as you know, Melissa, this is a little foreshadowing for something we're going to talk about in a few minutes, but we don't necessarily provide the right type of training or allow them to receive training in the way they want to. And so we'll talk about that as well. But yes, it's both. It's opportunities, and it's the way we train in some cases. So.
Great. Thank you, guys. I know we're getting a lot of questions, so I'm going to continue to move on, and we'll make sure we try to get to as many as we can as we continue through. But we really want to share and make sure that you guys see the results of the Trends in Hospitality Training and Development study that we conducted earlier this year. The first piece that we're going to talk about is the training spending and resources, and what's happening in the training departments in terms of training budgets. The first slide I'm going to show you is the distribution of training. And we look at here, we see between restaurants and hotel lodgings, we split it up between unit level, front of the house, back of the house, unit level management, multi-unit manager, corporate office, and other. You could see there's a pretty big balance between hotel and lodging, with a lot of focus going on that front of the house that has the most interface with employees or with your customers. And there's a lot of balance there until you get to the multi-unit management, corporate office, and other. We're also seeing with the distribution of restaurant training budget, we're seeing it change a little bit between full service and limited service. It looks like limited service is putting a lot of focus in their training budget into the management ranks, with 45% of the distribution going into to the management, where in full service it's only 23%. The majority of that training budget is hitting that unit level front of the house. So the first slide that we're really going to show a comparison in where you're spending your money and how it affects your company is the hourly turnover percentage of budget spent on the training of certified train the trainers. So companies that are spending 5% or more on training the trainers, on average, have a 78% turnover, where companies that are spending less than 5% on training their certified trainers have 101% turnover. That's a 23% difference on those who are spending more on train the trainers. John and Calvin, training budgets and this in particular, does this surprise you?
Yeah, it doesn't surprise me. And one thing I want to say before I even answer that question is, for everybody who's looking at this presentation, if you don't immediately take this information back to your work and do something about it, you're losing hundreds of thousands of dollars. Look at the amount, 23% difference in turnover, and you know how much it costs in turnover every year. So this is one of those slides. These are one of those things that just kind of hit you in the head and go, yes, of course we should be spending more on the people who are doing the training. If we train the trainers correctly, we make sure that they've got all the tools, all the processes needed, that we allow them the travel budget if they need to go out there and train properly and not, sort of do it halfway. Clearly, the employees they train are going to be better. They're going to want to stay. They're going to make more money. They're going to do better. It just makes much more sense to do it that way. So, oftentimes when companies get in trouble, the first thing they cut is training, and they get rid of certified trainers, and they get rid of that program, when in fact they should be beefing up the training program, because the more they spend getting their trainers ready to go out and actually train, the less turnover they're going to have and the more money they'll save. Calvin?
The one thing that I will add, just thinking of from a hotel standpoint, and it's maybe the case also from a restaurant standpoint, is a lot of the time it may be the manager of housekeeping. In some cases it may be the general manager of a small 50-room property that is doing a lot of the training. And the one thing I throw out to my hotel people out there is, are we training them to train? We could look at this as a server being trained to train other servers, and a busser being trained to train other bussers, or a line cook, or whatever the case may be. But it's also from a management standpoint as well. We do have managers that are out there that are training hourly employees. Have we trained those individuals? And when we do, we see from a turnover standpoint, there's a big reduction.
And that doesn't surprise me at all when you see the reduction in turnover. So the next piece we're going to go through is training practices. So we talked about training budgets. Now we're going to be talking about the actual time allocation. So we looked at where are you spending the time in your training, and most of the training time is offered to that unit level hourly employees. You look at that and you see in hotel lodging 47% of the time is on that line employee compared to limited service and full service at 17 and 36%. I think what's really interesting in this is that you look at that certified trainer, which we just talked about, and you look at the time of what we're spending on getting that certified trainer fully trained and giving them the time investment. It's only 2%, 11%, and 5% in perspective to the others. So the next piece is who is training the unit level hourly employees, and you see here this has actually changed from last year, because last year we had a choice where you could only check one, and this year we could check all that applies. So you see the numbers have changed a little bit over the year and over the last time, and can show all of the options. So we're seeing that in full service restaurants. They said it was almost always a certified trainer. In some companies, with the help of managers and hourly employees, but they're definitely using the trainers. In limited service, we heard that it'll be a combination between trainers, other managers, including the general managers, or even other hourly employees. It's just not one of the groups. It's kind of a combination of all. And then for hotel and lodging, we found that it is a combination as well. Two things that are interesting about hotels is that the most frequent response was saying other managers were involved more than the general managers and hourly employees. And the use of certified trainers was much smaller than the others. The next piece is less appears to mean more, and another piece where we're tying that turnover number and compared to, we're looking at the trainers. So those companies that had had 10 employees or less per trainer versus those that had 10 employees or more, we saw 11% difference in turnover. So this is again another significant amount where we're seeing a difference between those that invest more on having those trainers and having less employees per trainer. So Calvin and John, who's doing what here, and what's the feedback that you got at conference? Is there a difference between hotels and restaurants and how training is conducted? And Calvin, you can give us the insight on the hotel piece, and John from the restaurant side. That would be really helpful.
Calvin, I'll let you go ahead and start.
All right, absolutely. So I kind of foreshadowed this with the last segment that we just talked about. I mean, you can see that other managers and general managers, they play a role in training, and that's again a large part of that is the size of the property. In my experience, you typically have one employee per I'm just thinking about my own business, per one room. I've been in large room properties, so we have certified trainers, whether that's at a large Gaylord property, a large, the Broadmoor, so on and so forth. But again, in those smaller properties, you do see the general manager and other managers that are a big part of the training. And I just kind of echo what I mentioned earlier on the previous break there, and that is, are we spending the money and the time to equip those managers, whether they're the general manager or the other managers? Are we spending the money and the time to make sure that they are trained to train other people? That's important. Again, we can see that from a turnover standpoint.
Yeah, on the restaurant side, I think you'll see, where full service has a lot more certified trainers maybe than like quick service. Mm-hmm. And I think part of that is just because we've got more employees in full service. So you've got a limited number of people in a quick service restaurant, and that manager is oftentimes the trainer, and oftentimes even working a position. So I think that's where you see the difference on the restaurant side.
Yeah, that's a really good point, John, is dependent on the size, both for hotel and restaurants, is who's going to be doing the training. So let's move forward on the orientation practices that we're seeing. And how are orientations conducted for new hourly employees? I thought this part was really interesting, and we're going to share some really great insights that came from the orientation. But it's also something that I think is really, we're seeing is really, really imperative and important, especially when you look back on the data that I shared up front of how many people were losing within the first 3 months of their employment. That 27%, almost 1 in 3 employees were losing within the first 3 months. So how important is orientation for these new hourly employees? And we asked, how are they being conducted? So you could see here the relative majority is person to person. We're seeing group settings being used a little bit more in that full service, as well as online and electronic format. So how much orientation are we offering? The median number of hours offered for orientation was 3 hours. The most frequent and common response, about 28% of companies said 2 hours. So I think we can all agree that that new employee is really critical to the success, but can we quantify how important it is? And we absolutely can. So relationships, the relationships that we have with those new employees are really important, and they can reduce turnover. So this was a shocker, I know, last year, and even again this year, we see a 13% difference in turnover of those companies that have 4 or more hours of orientation compared to those that offer 4 hours or less of orientation. When we start to talk about the sheer impact of numbers this has on our organizations, part of this is, what does it cost? At People Report, we ask that question to our members, and on average we see that it's close to $14,000 to turn over one manager, and for the hourly it's literally $1,100, close to $1,100 for an hourly employee. So when we start talking about a 13% difference in turnover numbers, yes, spending more money on orientation does cost money, but is it costing you money long run that we're paying more for the turnover piece? Calvin, I know that you're really passionate about this piece. What are your thoughts in seeing this?
Absolutely. Echoing what John said earlier about a previous slide, this is another one of those slides that you need to be taking back to your executives and making sure that they understand the importance of orientation, the importance of really bringing an individual into your culture. I mean, every last one of your organizations have a culture, whether it's written or implied or whatever the case may be. We want to bring people into that culture, and orientation is a way to do that. And the more time that we can spend with an individual and bring them in, it absolutely reduces the turnover. It definitely reduces it in that 3-month window that we saw earlier. So it is very important. And I also want us to, as a group, when we think about orientation, really think more about the entire onboarding process. So when I think of orientation, I think of whether it's a group setting or an individual or the e-learning component. It is the part where you talk about the history, and maybe you throw in a tour, if depending upon the size of the property, and just kind of the norms, the values, all of that good stuff. But think about who is handling the paperwork and what that process looks like. If we're giving them uniforms and whatever the case may be, what does that process look like? All of that ties into the onboarding experience, and that's really what it is. It is an experience more than it is a class or a session or whatever it is. It's an experience that is going to dictate what the future of that employee is going to look like. So very important slide that you should be sharing with your teams.
And we had a question about what is included in orientation, and that is not part of the training. This is just true, the orientation of walking them through what your organization is and what it is. It's not the on-the-job training is not included in this. So that's important. I think, we talked about this a lot last year as well, is this whole orientation piece about really understanding the brand presence and the brand and what they are buying into with the culture piece. So I know I've heard that a lot from you all at CHART, and I know that was a really big takeaway last year when we were talking about this, is the companies that really invest the time to get them involved and engaged from a culture standpoint and from a brand standpoint tend to have a lot of success and getting people excited about working for them. John and Calvin, any thoughts on that?
I have just one thought, and I love the fact that you threw brand out there. In my past, we would play this game with our new employees. It was called on brand and off brand, and we would look at experiences. We all get feedback from our customers. So whether it's a written letter, whether that is a form that they do, and we would look at experiences, and we would look at things that were on brand, meaning we actually met our brand promise, or off brand, we actually didn't meet our brand promise. And you are 100% correct. Helping the individuals know, our new employees and our current employees know, what does it mean to be on brand, and we have to hit that every single day. So absolutely yes, making sure they understand the brand perspective as well.
And then quickly, I think it's also making sure you understand your brand values. It's making sure you understand if you're involved in the community. This is where you tell that story, and this is where you get them involved from day one and showing that you're involved in your community and what that looks like. Those are the things that you need to be discussing in the orientation. What are your values? How do you live up to them? What do those look like? What are they personified? Not just a bunch of words on paper, but how do you actually make that actionable? I think the companies that do that really well are the companies that don't lose people within the first 3 months. They're the companies that retain them and are in that 79% versus the 92%.
And John, you're so right on that, especially when we look at the majority of people that we're hiring as those millennials, and really understanding how millennials think about who they're working for. And it's really important that they feel that they're a part of it, that they're working for an organization that does something bigger and better than just selling food. So I think there's a lot of truth to that. Let's keep on moving on for the sake of time, and appreciate your guys' insights on that. I love hearing from Calvin and John. I think I could hear from you guys all day long on this stuff. So we talk about how new hires are trained. You look at on-the-job training, of course, is the most popular. You look at 60% of hourly employees have that on-the-job training, or relatively a lot of managers are getting on-the-job training too. I think it's interesting when you look at this as the written in manuals and the books, is that 22%, there's a little bit more for managers, but it's actually kind of pretty close to what hourlies are doing, which really surprised me as well. The average ongoing training for hourly employees looks like on average was 12 hours for ongoing training as we continue to train them throughout the year. And then we look at hourly turnover and ongoing training again, and we do the comparisons. So we look at those companies that have more than 10 hours of ongoing training throughout the year had 75 on average, 75% turnover, where those that offer 10 hours or less was 86%. Again, 11% difference here. And when we start to talk about the dollars and cents of this, this is a really big impact. And I think you're right, John and Calvin, if you're not taking these numbers into your executive team, you're doing yourself a disservice. So that leads me to the question is, do you think your executives understand this? Do you think they understand the impact that's happening here?
I think they understand the impact of how much hourly turnover is, but I don't know that they understand how important ongoing training is. I think a lot of times executives are looking at what's the initial cost of training to get somebody up and running and get them productive. And we forget that we've got to continue to develop. I mean, 12 hours of training over a year is not a whole lot of training. So we've got to make sure that we're providing opportunities. And again, that goes back to giving them opportunities to develop sideways, crossways, not just up, to lower that turnover as well. So it's all of this is all tied together, but you've got to make that case with slides like this to talk to your executives on why we need to include more training for everybody throughout the year.
The only thing that I would add to that is simply this: training doesn't have to happen in a classroom. Most of our organizations do pre-shift meetings, and those pre-shift meetings or lineups, whatever you want to call them, last 15 minutes or so. If we can get 5 minutes, that's how I've been trying to get my team to focus. Is I probably cannot sell to my president and CEO 64 hours worth of training for every employee, but I can sell 5 minutes in a pre-shift meeting. And if you multiply that by 52 weeks a year, and you multiply that by 5 days, you're going to have a lot of training that occurs. So just really understanding that training doesn't necessarily have to happen in a classroom. It can happen organically anywhere. We just have to be mindful and purposeful about it.
That's great. Agreed. Absolutely. So let's move on to e-learning, which is a really popular subject. Every time I go to a CHART conference, there's a lot of conversation about e-learning and the impact it has and who's using it and who isn't. So the first piece we're going to talk about is external resources. The usage is growing. So 66% of companies said that they had an expenditure increase compared to 2013. And then when we asked, is that continuing to grow, 55% said that they expect their expenses to increase in 2015. So training costs across the board are continuing to get more expensive. We see that when we look at that cost of turnover, that had an increase significantly year over year as well. And then when we look at e-learning training and the percentage of companies providing here, we're looking at that 88% of hotel and lodging are using e-learning, and then 69% of limited service restaurants and 58% of full service restaurants. Only 9% of companies overall are using e-learning, which was a little bit of a surprise here. So this is the average of those that are using it and providing it, but only 9% overall said that they are using it. E-learning is on the rise here, and we look at the training that's being provided. Hotel and lodging is showing a percentage of increased use in 50%. Limited service is 89%, and full service is at 85%. So, Calvin and John, when I looked at the number that only 9% are using e-learning, why do you think that is?
Well, on the restaurant side, there's a whole lot of, well, we've always done it this way mentality. You know, and some of our employees are a little bit older. In some cases, some of our servers have been around for a long time. Cooks typically don't get on computers very often. You know, there's a million excuses of why not to do it. We've already got these materials, they're already created. It doesn't cost us any money. But what's not happening is they're not looking at the employees that we're hiring and bringing in, which is the millennial group, which we've mentioned, 2 or 3 times in this session alone. And that group doesn't like to read manuals. That group doesn't like to read much in general. And so, they think of these e-courses, senior teams and people who are hesitant to put in e-learning, they think of e-courses as having to take all this time that somebody's sitting in the back and not doing, as opposed to understanding that they're quick chunks of consistent information and interactive sort of gaming type of things that can help people actually learn and then be more effective when they do go out with a trainer on the actual floor. So I think it's just a matter of us as training professionals. We have to sell it better. We have to explain the decreasing cost of paper. We have to explain that the employees who are coming in are the ones who need it, and that will decrease turnover, and so you have to put those numbers to it, and we just have to do a better job of selling e-learning to our executive teams.
And I will throw out, I think, 3 points here. Point number one, when I look at the fact that hotel and lodging has a higher percentage of usage at 88%, I really believe that that's a big part of that is more a space issue than it is really anything else. Meaning, when you think about a quick service restaurant or even a full service restaurant, where outside of the POS terminal are they going to get onto a computer? When I think about my hotel or even some smaller hotels, there are places where individuals can use or get onto a computer that is not in guest view. So I think that is why lodging is so high. As we talk about increasing, I think that what I just said is the reason why things are going to increase, which is, people are going to look at, organizations are looking at more mobile learning. So whether it's an iPad or it's some other tablet or the surfaces, whatever it is, how can we get information onto those different platforms? And then the last thing that I would say, and this is really from a hotel standpoint and even from a personal standpoint, and that is, how do you train service online? You know, how do you train service without being in front of an individual and seeing how they respond to a particular situation? And you know, John mentioned gaming, and the American Hotel and Lodging Educational Institute has recently received a grant to create a game. It's more for academia than it is for hoteliers, but it could be used in the hotel world, and I had the opportunity to get a glimpse of it. But they've created this game that helps an individual really understand kind of what I would say the nuances, not necessarily the people touching side of service, but the nuances, the things of, you know, making sure that lights aren't burnt out, making sure that the room is clean, making sure that the lobby looks the way that it needs to look, and so on and so forth. So I definitely, even though it only says 50%, I definitely see a rise. But the last thing I will say is consistent, and it really is about the consistent message and making sure if you have multiple properties across the United States or across the world, the likelihood that you're going to be able to go to each one of those locations, restaurants, hotels, and deliver that same message is unlikely, but you can do that online using an e-learning platform.
And I know we're running short here on time, but really quick question, because you intrigued me. You said, how can you do e-learning for service? So what are people using it for? What is e-learning used for that would be helpful? And I think that's the last question that we're going to be able to answer here at this point.
Just thinking about my own organization, we use it for compliance. We use it for things that we can't, quote unquote, broadmorize. We use it for bloodborne pathogens. We've used it for safety and sanitation. We've used it for alcohol awareness, so on and so forth. So really, compliance courses that we can't truly put, you know, a big time spin on it, because compliance is compliance.
And I echo that. We do a lot of compliance as well, but I do think you can use it in service if you use it such as, here's some recorded customer complaints, and you've got to respond to those customer complaints the proper way. You can do that. You can actually train through the course, and then you go out and you practice. So, but no e-course is good unless you actually go out and make them apply it. So don't just think you're going to have a bunch of e-courses and your training's done. It's got to be e-course, paired with some sort of practice, trial and error, that kind of thing.
That's fantastic. Thank you guys so much. I know we covered a whole lot. Why don't Calvin and John, you want to wrap us up with some key insights, and then we'll be ready to wrap up. Thank you guys all for joining us.
Absolutely. Calvin, I'll take this first slide, and then you can take the second. Is that good? All right, turnover is going up as unemployment continues to grow. We're hiring younger employees as the labor market tightens. I think we all know that. Smaller ratio of trainings per trainer obviously equals less turnover. The dollars that are allocated to training our trainers is paramount because the turnover is so much lower when we do that. And our full-service restaurants rely primarily on certified trainers, mostly because it's what they've always done, and they've got more employees that they can do that. Hotel and lodging and limited service restaurants tend to be more equally distributed among managers, peers, as well as trainers.
All right, so investing in orientations help reduce turnover through early engagement of new employees. You know, we talked about that. Very, very important. Make sure you take that back to your teams. Dedicating more time to ongoing training seems to be best practice of companies achieving lower turnover. And again, understanding that training doesn't necessarily have to happen in a classroom. It can happen anywhere, and just making that happen with purpose. And then training via e-learning is becoming more and more prevalent. So really, like John said, you can't just put a person on a computer and think that is the be-all and end-all, making sure that we practice. And in closing, you know, I do want to make sure from a chart standpoint that we talk about the fact that in February we will be having our conference in Seattle. as well as in July we will have our summer conference in Charleston. The recording as well as the slides will be located on the CHART website. And we do hold regional meetings all over the country. So those of you that are members, not members, whoever's online and being a part of this, we would love to see you at a regional training forum. They are free to you, and we listen to our members and our people that are a part of those forums to make sure that we're talking about exactly what you want to hear from us.
Lastly, we'd like to make sure we thank TDN2K People Report. You guys have been an unbelievable resource for us at CHART, and this information you provided is just huge. And again, I want to urge everybody, use the slides that make the most sense to you to go and make your business cases to make your companies better. When you do that, training then doesn't become a cost center, it becomes a profit driver. And that's what we all want as training professionals. So, Melissa, thanks to you and your group.
Thank you. Thank you guys for letting us be a part of it.
Absolutely. If anybody has any further questions after this, and again, we ran out of time, please feel free. If you're a CHART member, post them to Ask My Peers. Otherwise, we can email them to CHART, and we'll try to get you the answers out as quickly as possible. Calvin, anything?
That is it. Thank you, everyone, for being a part of it.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.